Hi, I'm Nicola, and today I want to talk about a type of person that almost every manager has on their team at some point, and almost nobody flags as difficult. They're the one who always says yes. You ask for a volunteer, their hand goes up, a project comes in without an obvious owner, and it ends up on their desk. They stay late, they pick up the slack, they smooth things over. And when you review their performance, you give them great marks, because on paper, what's not to like? And yet something isn't quite right. There's a quiet tension building that you can't put your finger on. Or maybe things are running smoothly until suddenly they're not, and you're left wondering how you got here. I want to challenge the way you think about the people pleaser, because if you're only looking at what they contribute on the surface, you're missing what's actually happening beneath the surface. And as a manager, that gap matters. Let's be honest about why people pleasers fly under the radar for so long. They are genuinely helpful, they're usually well liked, they don't cause visible conflict, and they get things done. Managers tend to reward exactly this kind of behavior without realizing it, because it makes life easier in the short term. They say yes to additional work without complaint. They take on tasks that nobody else wants. They rarely bring problems to you because they don't want to be seen as difficult or demanding. They pick up the emotional weight of the team, mediating small tensions, keeping people happy, and smoothing things over before issues reach you. If you looked at their output alone, you'd say they were one of your strongest performers, and in many ways they are. That's what makes this so complicated. The issue isn't what they do, it's why they do it and what happens over time as a result. A genuine people pleaser isn't just being kind or helpful. Their sense of worth is closely tied to what other people think of them and whether they feel they're being valued, liked, or needed. So saying yes isn't really a choice for them. It's a compulsion. Saying no feels genuinely threatening, as though it puts their place on the team at risk. That means they'll agree to things they don't have the capacity for. They'll tell you everything is fine when it isn't. They'll pretend to support a decision in a meeting and say nothing, even if they have real concerns. They won't raise their own needs because asking for something feels like an imposition, and the idea of causing inconvenience to someone else produces real anxiety. They're also quietly scanning for signals of approval all the time. How you respond to their work, whether you acknowledge their contribution, and how you react when they do push back slightly. All of it gets processed through the lens of, do they still value me? None of this is conscious manipulation. Most people pleasers are completely unaware of the extent to which these patterns are driving their behavior. But whether you're aware or not, the impact is real, and it lands on you as their manager. This is where I want you to sit up and pay attention, because the costs here are easy to miss until they become impossible to ignore. The first is over-reliance. When someone on your team takes on extra work without complaint, other team members learn they can offload to that person. Over time, an informal dependency develops. Work gravitates toward them because they've never once said no, and the rest of the team often takes that for granted. You end up with a significant workload imbalance that erodes team fairness and quietly breeds resentment. The second cost is the quality of your information. A people pleaser will not give you accurate feedback if they think it might displease you. They'll agree with your plans in a one-to-one, leave the room, and express their real opinion to someone else entirely. You're making decisions based on signals that aren't reliable, because the person you're talking to is curating what they show you. The third is the invisible burnout. Because they can't say no and won't raise their own needs, they often absorb far more than is sustainable, and unlike someone who will tell you they're overloaded, a people pleaser will keep going. Right up to the point where they can't. Then it comes at you fast, a sudden absence, a resignation, an unexpected dip in performance, or an emotional outburst that feels completely out of nowhere. But it wasn't out of nowhere. It was building for months, and you had no visibility because they kept telling you everything was fine. And when they leave, the gap is enormous because they were doing the work of more than one person, and nobody else developed the capability to cover it because there was never any need. So let's talk about what you can actually do about it, because this is where it gets practical. The first thing is to stop rewarding the behavior, even when it's convenient. If someone says yes to every single request, at some point you need to ask yourself whether that's a healthy dynamic or whether you're benefiting from their inability to push back. That's a useful and slightly uncomfortable question to sit with. Most managers don't set out to exploit a people pleaser, but it can happen gradually, and without meaning to, you end up as part of the problem. The second thing is to have honest conversations about workload and capacity. And I mean genuinely honest ones, not just a quick "how are you getting on?" I want you to sit down properly and look at what they're carrying. Ask them directly, is this realistic? What would need to move to make space for this? And then wait. Give them time to answer, because their instinct will be to reassure you, and you need to create enough of a pause for the real answer to surface. Give them explicit permission to say no. I know that sounds strange, but some people pleasers genuinely need to hear from their manager that saying no is allowed before they'll believe it, so say it clearly. Something like, I'd rather you tell me when you don't have capacity than take something on and struggle with it. That's more useful to me. When they hear it from you directly, it starts to shift what they believe is acceptable. You also need to help them build a process for handling requests that come from other people, not just from you. Because a lot of the overload doesn't come from their manager, it comes from colleagues who've learned they'll say yes to everything. Help them practice a holding response, something like, let me check what I've got on and come back to you. It gives them a pause point between the request and the answer, and that pause is where the real decision making can happen. Over time, that small shift makes a significant difference. Create space for disagreement, particularly in team settings. If you notice they're quiet in meetings or they quickly agree with whatever direction is suggested, bring them in deliberately. Before we move forward, I'd really like to hear your take on this. And when they do share a concern or a different perspective, resist the urge to immediately justify your position. Acknowledge what they've said first. If they experience disagreement as safe, if they see that raising a concern doesn't cost them anything, they'll do it more often. And that's good for you because you'll get more honest information. Watch carefully for signs of overload because they won't volunteer them. A people pleaser who is burning out will keep telling you they're fine. What you're looking for are the small signals, work quality dropping slightly, responses that take longer than usual, a slightly flat energy in one-to-ones, or taking more time off than is typical for them. None of those things on their own is alarming, but together they're worth paying attention to and raising gently before things get worse. When you do raise it, be specific rather than general. Saying you seem tired lately, is everything okay, invites reassurance. Saying I've noticed the last 2 reports came in later than usual, and that's not like you, I want to check in properly, invites an actual conversation. They need you to make it concrete enough that they can't brush it off. It's also worth thinking about how you give feedback to a people pleaser because they receive it differently from most. They're often scanning your tone as much as the content of what you're saying. And if there's any ambiguity in your message, they will almost always assume the worst about how you're feeling about them. So when you give constructive feedback, be clear and then be warm. Separate the two things. Lead with the specific behavior you want to address, then close with something that anchors the relationship. Not to soften the feedback, but to make clear that the feedback doesn't change how you view them. That distinction matters enormously to someone whose sense of security at work is tied to your opinion of them. And finally, the structural point. If your team is running smoothly in part because one person is absorbing everything nobody else will touch, that's not just a people management issue, it's a team design issue. The people pleaser is making a dysfunction invisible. Their presence masks the fact that work isn't distributed fairly, that accountability isn't clear, or that some team members are getting away with doing less than they should. Addressing the person without addressing the structure means the same pattern will keep repeating with them or with the next person who steps into that gap. Managed well, a people pleaser can be a genuinely committed, highly capable team member. They often have strong interpersonal skills, they care deeply about the people around them, and they'll work hard for a manager they trust. The goal isn't to change who they are, it's to create enough safety and structure that they don't have to operate from a place of anxiety, and that makes everything work better for them and for you. And for people pleasers are not difficult in the way we usually mean the word. They're not aggressive, they're not undermining you, they're not causing obvious disruption, but they create very real problems quietly over time, and those problems land in your lap when they finally break. Understanding what's actually driving the behaviour changes how you manage it, and managing it well protects them, protects your team, and honestly makes your job considerably easier in the long run. If you found this useful, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear whether you've managed a people pleaser and what the experience was like. And if you want to go deeper into managing difficult people and workplace dynamics, the Managers Academy is where I work through these kinds of issues every month with practical tools and a community of managers facing the same challenges you are. It's £37 a month and the link is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.